Oh, what's up, everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and on this episode of Coding with the Force, I'm going to show you how to set up single sign-on with Okta in your Salesforce orgs. Alright, guys, so just like with every other video I do, I'm going to tell you why you would ever even want to set up Okta with Salesforce to begin with. If you don't know what Okta is, it's an identity management tool, and the whole goal of it is to make it so that if you're somebody that's in charge of, determining the individuals that work at your company's identity or their level of access for the various systems that they could be assigned to, it's easier if you can just deal with all that in the exact same place than it is if, you say you have, Salesforce and Azure DevOps and who knows, 20 other apps in your system. If they had to go to every single one of those apps to provision users and to give them their identity or their access to different things in the organization, then that would be a lot harder, right? They'd have to log into Salesforce and assign all those different things. They'd have to log into Azure DevOps and assign whatever license and stuff that they need to assign there. But instead, you can have somebody set up Okta and have all of that stuff just centralized in Okta. You can set up your users there. You can, have multi-factor authentication set up for them, all that kind of stuff. And on top of the whole, it benefits you by only having to do all that stuff in one place. It also makes it so that all of your user authentication between your platforms is consistent. So, one place you don't have super high level of multi-factor authentication or, multiple levels of multi-factor authentication, and another place you just don't have anything, right? So it kind of makes it so that your security standards for logging in and identifying yourself for applications are the same across whatever applications you have, right? So pretty beneficial once you kind of realize what it's used for. But anyway, now that we've gone over why you or your company, I'm sure your company is the one probably making you do this. Chances are you didn't make this decision. But now that you know why your company or yourself would want to do this, let me show you just how simple it is, thankfully, to set this up. All right, guys, so the first thing that I want to go over real quick is the My Domain. Chances are you probably have this set up, but in the off chance that you don't, you don't necessarily have to have this set up for Okta single sign-on. But if you want more than the identity provider authentication. So if you want to be able to sign on, if you just want to be able to sign on from Okta to Salesforce, then I don't believe you have to have My Domain set up. But if you want users to also be able to go to a Salesforce login page, so that could be your community login page, it could be your regular login.salesforce.com page, or whatever your domain is that users log in through. If you want them to be able to land on that page and click the Okta SSO button, then you will need to set up My Domain. So if you plan to do that, make sure that you set this up first. Chances are you've already done it, especially if you're in a Lightning org, which most are these days because you can't do hardly anything in Lightning without it. But important thing to set up. So now that we've gone over that, let's go over how to set up a free Okta developer instance. So you can go to okta.com/developer/free trial and set up an Okta trial org or trial instance, whatever. You might already have a production org in wherever you work, but it's maybe a nice idea to set up a trial org and See if you can get this working before you go into the production instance of Okta and start messing around with things, if they even give you that option, which chances are they probably don't. But if you want to figure out how all this works before you start working with whoever the Okta team is at your company, this is the best and the easiest way to do it. So go get a free trial org. And one thing that I want to point out that I have noticed anyway is that if you go sign up for an Okta trial, a free developer or trial, you can go, if you put in a Gmail account, it'll tell you that a business email is required. I don't know why it puts this. I don't know if it wants to just scare you into using your business email. You don't actually have to. If you use this email address and you fill out everything else and you hit get started, it's still going to provision an Okta instance for you. So don't worry too much about that, I guess. Just wanted to point that out because I thought it was interesting and probably has deterred people for no reason. Okay, so once you set up your Okta dev account, or you're in your Okta production account if you're daring, then you'll eventually, after the first time you log in, you'll land on this Get Started page. And what we actually need to do is go to Applications over here. And within Applications, we'll click Add an Application. And you will ignore this thing down here that says Salesforce because it is not particularly helpful for us. And I'll show you why. We need SAML authentication for what I'm about to show you, and this does not provide it. But this one, Salesforce.com integration right here, does, and you can see it right here, right? SAML, SWA, and provisioning. So after we pick this application, click the Add button, and we can name this whatever we want. So I'm going to say Salesforce internal users. And for me, this is production. For most of you, it'll, if you're just doing this as a test, it'll be sandbox. And if you're like me and you occasionally do government contracting work, you will need to use the government instance type. Very important if you do that. If you work in the government, that you select that, because otherwise nothing's going to work and you're going to wonder why, and it's going to be very frustrating. Trust me, I've made that mistake. So anyway, after you have labeled your application, you've selected your instance type, you're going to go to your My domain and you're going to grab everything before the .my.salesforce.com and you're going to drop it into custom domain. After that, you're going to make a decision. For me, I've labeled this Salesforce internal users because I intend to put this on my regular Salesforce login page. But if you were doing this for a community, you might want to choose community users or portal users or whatever else. Don't be deterred by the fact that you have to pick a profile and type for your Salesforce.com app you're setting up right now. You can set up multiple Salesforce.com apps. In fact, I believe it even says it down here. Use multiple Salesforce.com application instances to handle both standard users as well as custom portal and community users, right? So if you need one set up for portal users, just create another Salesforce.com app and make sure that you use the user profile of one of these two, whether you have a regular community or portal community. The other thing you can set up in here is you can put in the amount of licenses you have for your standard Salesforce users so that it can kind of count how many are left. It's not exactly what I would call accurate because you can provision different user license types in Salesforce. So you could have Force.com platform user, or you could have a Salesforce license. Those are two different licenses and they'll be consumed at different rates. So anyway, you can put this in here if you want to, so that you can have a semi-accurate count of the amount of licenses you have left when you're provisioning users within Okta. I would not turn this off typically application visibility. So if you want this to show up in My Apps, which I'll show you here in just a minute, don't check these boxes. And I typically use the automatic login when user lands on login page. I don't normally turn that off. You might have a good use case too, but I have not personally found one in the, I guess, 4 or 5 orgs now I've set this up in. Okay, so after you choose all those things, you're going to land on this page where you get to choose your sign-on methods. And what we're going to choose is SAML 2.0. And now that we have chosen this, we'll do a couple things. First, make sure to click this View Setup Instructions, because it's going to have this page actually auto-generates some values within it that I'll show you in just a minute that allow make it easier for you to configure your SAML. In fact, I think it's probably the only way to do it, unless there's a different way in Okta to get to that information that I'm not aware of. And within Salesforce, after you click on that View Information link in Okta, or View Setup Instructions rather, you are going to go to Single Sign-On Settings. And within Single Sign-On Settings, you're going to do a couple things. The first is, I already have SAML enabled in my org, but chances are if this is your first single sign-on setup that you have done, it's not. So you're going to want to come in here and make sure that you check the SAML enabled checkbox. Very important. If you don't have this checked, then everything we're about to do isn't going to work. The other thing is, if you want your federation IDs, the federation IDs are, there's a field on user called federation ID. It's what Okta and most single sign-on providers will actually match against to determine whether or not you are who you say you are in whatever platform it is you're trying to log you into. So if you don't want that to be case sensitive for one reason or another, typically I would say you do. But if you don't, then you can check this box, and then that will become, the federation ID will become case insensitive. And then this part is actually very confusing, but I want to go over it really quick. Delegated authentication basically enables you to select groups of users who can no longer sign in through the Salesforce login page. So if more specifically the Salesforce login form, I guess. So if you have them land on a login page, then those users that you later identify through profile settings will not be able to put in a Salesforce username and password and sign in, even if they previously had one. They'll have to use one of the single sign-on providers that you allow them to use. Anyway, it's actually very confusing the way that Salesforce has written this. This makes it seem like it's going to disable the login for everybody. It doesn't. It enables a checkbox on profiles that says is single sign-on enabled, and then you'll check that is single sign-on enabled box on every profile that you don't want to be able to log into Salesforce through the regular login form. Very confusing. Maybe I shouldn't have even gone over it, because now it's making my video more confusing than it ought to be. But just so you know, delegated authentication basically allows you to choose which users can only use single sign-on. So anyway, we'll save that. All you need to do right now is click SAML enabled, but now you know about the other options if you're interested. And the next thing that we will do is create a single sign-on record. So we'll click new here, and we can name this whatever we want. So I'm going to do Okta SSO 2, because I already had an Okta SSO. And now that we are at this point, we need to come back over here to this View Setup Instructions page that we clicked, and we're going to grab a couple things. So we're going to grab this issuer. So down here in step 6 is most of the information that all the information that Okta generates for you to put in your Salesforce org. So we need to grab that issuer ID that it generates and put it there. Then we are going to download our identity provider certificate by clicking this link. And we are going to go over here, grab that cert, and choose it. And then we are going to do a couple more things. We're going to grab that identity provider login URL. Boom, 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 boom. And optionally, we can grab this custom logout URL. And what this will do is if your users log out now, instead of landing on the Salesforce page, they're going to land on the Okta login, or on the Okta login page instead of the Salesforce login page. And the last thing that we need to fill out is our entity ID, which is basically just our URL for our my domain. So let me go grab that real quick. If I can remember how to type, it's up in here. And you just grab this here, come on back over here, and go to HTTPS, or type in HTTPS : / and then paste in your my domain. And that is it. We'll hit the save button, and we need to grab one thing from here, and that is this login URL. Now I want to point out something that unfortunately I don't have set up in my org, but you might, and it might be very important. If you are provisioning, or you're setting Okta up for a community, you'll notice that down here, and right below organization, there is like a little arrow with a drop down that says your communities, or something along those lines. If you're setting this up for a community, make sure you click that drop down arrow and select the login URL for the community that you're setting this up for. Otherwise, nothing's going to work. You're going to be very confused, and you're going to waste a whole bunch of hours like I did, and really hate everything. So once you figure out the right login URL, you're going to come back over here, place it in here, and that's pretty much it. You can make a determination on the application username format. So this is the username format for the application, in this case Salesforce. I just typically use the Okta username, which is normally your email address, which is what Salesforce wants. But if you want to be more specific, you could either have a custom one, you could actually choose the email field to be super safe, or something along those lines. And that is it. In this app, you only have this action here if you're curious. I'm sure you could have figured that out. Anyway, so we've got our single sign-on set up, and we have this app kind of set up in Okta now, but there's one thing left to do, and that is set up our integration, and we're just going to do that. And technically you don't have to do this part, but it's going to make importing your users quite a bit easier, which we'll see here in just a second. So we'll set up an integration to basically connect Okta to Salesforce, and maybe if I remember my username and password, we can do this. We'll see if I can pull off the right password. I'm gonna guess it's this. This is definitely a guess, and I'm gonna go grab my security token from my email. Hopefully, I just set up this password like an hour ago, but I've already forgot it. Maybe not. We'll see. Okay, I got lucky. So after you set that up, then after you put in your username and then your password plus your security token, you can click Test API Credentials and save it. If you don't know what a security token is, you can figure that out by going up here in Salesforce to Settings, and I'm already on the Settings page, but it would normally load into this, and then you can click the Reset My Security Token. My dog's really angry up there, I guess. And then you click the Reset Security Token, and it's going to email that security token out to you. So that way you have it. Just to be very clear, you type in your password, and then right after you type in your password, you append that security token that you get sent in your email. All right.
we're going to save that. And now that that's been done, if you want provisioning in your Okta app, I will tell you right now, you should create another Salesforce.com application, and I'll show you why here in a second, but I don't want to screw something up ahead of time. Basically, what happens is if you turn on provisioning, you can't actually place it into users' My Apps. I'll show you here in a second. We're going to bypass this for now, but if you want user provisioning on, what I would say is create yet another Salesforce app, set this up within there, and just make it your provisioning app. Anyway, now I'll come back to this, I promise. The next thing that we're going to do is import our users. So before we would have had to, without that integration setup that we just did in the provisioning tab, we would have had to import a CSV. So you'd have to pull your users, bring them over, map them, import a CSV. Not super ideal. Now you can just click this Import Now button, and it's going to connect to Salesforce, pull in all your users, and let you select which ones you want to actually provision into Okta if you are interested in doing that. So it scanned my org, it found 4 users, and most importantly here, it found my matching user, which I named Taco Bell. So yeah, I like Taco Bell. So here we are. We've got this Okta, this user that we found in Salesforce that we are wanting to map to an Okta user. So Okta is telling us that we found an exact Okta user match because the emails are the same. That's what it's matching on. And we would like to assign the Salesforce user to this Okta user, which is perfect. And I don't care about these other 3. They're not important to me. So I'm just not going to check the boxes next to them. And then I'm going to click Confirm Assignments, and it's going to tell me how many new users, existing Okta users are going to be updated, and how many Salesforce users we explicitly chose to ignore, which we didn't do here. So anyway, we're going to hit Confirm, and that's great. So now our Okta user has been synced with our Salesforce user, and we can actually see that that's happened if we go to the Assignments tab and we take a look at our user here. So this is my Okta user that I synced with the user in Salesforce named Taco Bell because he had the same email address. And you can see that some things were brought over. So if you click on the edit button there and take a look what's in here, now Okta knows that in Salesforce I'm a system administrator, what the company name is, and then the feature licenses that I have within Salesforce, which is pretty cool. So I've assigned myself to this app, and now, hopefully, if I didn't mess anything up, no guarantee here, it should show up in My Apps. So let's go check that out. So if I click on My Apps, cool, I did not mess anything up. I see this Salesforce internal users app, and if I click on this, it should hopefully log me into Salesforce. And just like that, Salesforce and Okta are working together and doing single sign-on. Cool. So what we have done is set up identity provider initiated authentication through Okta. That's what that was when we clicked this app. This is the identity provider Okta, and we set up authentication through it to get into Salesforce. So real quick, I'm going to show you before I get into service provider initiated single sign-on, which is also very easy to set up. It's only going to take me a second to show you. Let me show you why you would need a different app, I believe. Again, I'm not an Okta expert, but this is the way I've set it up before for provisioning of users into Salesforce. The reason that you would need that is because if I come in here and I click Edit and I enable Create Users, Update User Attributes, or whatever else, it doesn't really matter as long as I start doing provisioning at all. And I save that. If I go over to My Apps now, you're going to see that it doesn't show up. So that can be very confusing. It was super confusing for me. I wasted hours trying to figure out why it doesn't show up. If you set up provisioning on your Salesforce.com app that you set up within Okta, it cannot show up in this apps area. If it can, I don't know how. So please feel free to let me know how, so that I can just set up one app in the future instead of two, if somebody out there is smart enough. Anyway, just so you know, that's a thing. Very confusing. I couldn't personally find any documentation about it. But like I said, I am by no means an Okta expert. I've just set this up for Salesforce quite a few times. Okay, so we've got this set up so that we can do identity provider initiated single sign-on into our Salesforce org, or identity provider authentication. So how do we within Salesforce set it up so that we can just go to the Salesforce login page and click the Okta button and sign in that way? The way that you would do that is, if you're in internal Salesforce, you'd go to My Domain. So if you're setting this up for internal users to log in anyway, you'd go to My Domain. And within My Domain, you can choose your authentication service down here. And you can go down, you can select from any of these options here. And my option is Okta SSO 2, the one that I just set up. And I'll hit save. And believe it or not, that is it. That's it. So if I go and I log out now, and I want to, took me back to Okta, so convenient. And I want to log into my org, which would be this guy. So if I just go here now, it should have logged me out. Yep. Then you will see down here that there's this button, Okta SSO 2, and if I click it, it's going to sign me in, just like that. So now I have a service provider initiated login flow as well, or initiated authentication as well, and that's all it took to do that. If you're doing this in a community, you'd go to the administration part of the community. So it's the you'd go to workspaces. I should have set up a community for this, so I'm sorry. You go to workspaces, you go to administration, and then there is a portion that is the login section, and then within the login section you can select which authentication you want. So you would just check the single sign-on record that you've got for it. And that's it, guys. Pretty simple. If I wasn't explaining this, you could probably do it in like 20 minutes or 15 minutes, maybe even less than that. Very simple to do, at least initially. You can get very complex within Okta and do a whole bunch of, automatic user profile assignments and group assignments and all that other kind of stuff. So I don't want to oversimplify the setup on Okta. That might get super complex depending on your org and what you're trying to do. But as far as setting it up just so that you can single sign on into Salesforce, that's really it. Not all that much more to it. So anyway, guys, if that's it for today. Hopefully that helps somebody, saved you a lot of pain in some areas that I had to suffer through personally. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe. I try to make at least 1 or 2 Salesforce videos a week. And thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.